After the earth-shattering brawl between the strongest master and disciple concludes, an ominous moon hangs in the sky, signaling the approaching catastrophe. Meanwhile, Sho and Arrow's journey has revealed shocking truths about his family's dark history and his pivotal role in the coming battle. Knowing the world faces annihilation once the final pillar emerges, Company 8 has declared open rebellion to reclaim the empire for the people. Can our heroes overcome the evangelist's forces before the 8th pillar awakens and brings about the end of everything? Let's find out. In the next scene, we move to the base of the White Clads, where Fairy, Sister Sumire, and Karen are together. Fairy says that only one pillar remains, and what lay before them is only the prologue of what's to come, to which Sister Sumire agreed. The cataclysm will merge this world with the collective unconscious of man. In short, it spells out the destruction of the world. According to their companion with 3 letter A's for eyes, they need to guide the collective unconscious of man in the right direction, because as it stands, the endpoint of mankind's idea equates to death, and they cannot allow anyone to disrupt that thinking. Then, Karen asked Haumea how the collective unconscious was doing. She replied that there was nothing to worry about, and in the end, all they see is death, and the evangelist is pleased as well. At that moment, 2 eyes appeared from the darkness behind all of them, and it was Dr. Giovanni. He said that like insects flying toward flames, people are marching toward death and destruction, and the only difference between the two is a matter of scale. As it will be in this world, and as it will be in this universe, it will rumble. After he said that, the 8th and final pillar appeared. People saw it, and one said that earthquakes were causing it. His companion realized that it was the 8th one, so the white-haired person asked what would happen to the world now. After that, something else emerged from the ocean, so people started running away because it was said to be a titan, and someone even said to call the fire force. Because of this, the fire force arrived on the scene, and they told people to go with the 4th company. Captain Honda asked if that was the final pillar, while someone was preparing a catapult and getting a clear line of fire. The one giving those orders was Captain Pan, and he added that they should leave the Titan to Company 2 and Hajima, because they were there to evacuate citizens, and Ogun and Karen responded with Roger. On the other hand, according to Korono, that was the final pillar, so he asked if they could leave it to the fire force. Nevertheless, Oguro replied that he was almost finished, so he should stop complaining and do his job. He added that when the first pillar appeared, it was more than enough shock for him. But now, an immense titan had appeared off Tama Bay, and there was also a weird smiling crescent moon. At the top of the pillar, Fairy was floating there, and he said that it was the duty of the cataclysm force to progress the cataclysm unhindered, to suppress the existence of the Savior completely and utterly. On the other hand, Company 4 was evacuating panicking people, and fire was coming out from one person. Before long, that person became an infernal, and Karen was shocked that he combusted. Then, it was followed by the combustion of other people, and they attacked Karen. Ogun asked him if he was okay, and he apologized because he let down his guard. Ogun replied that he was saying it as if it was an excuse, because he shouldn't have let down his guard in the first place, saying that was why he said my bad. Then, he told Ogun that he would stop them and buy time for them, and he created a barrier using his powers. At that time, Pan arrived blowing a whistle, and according to him, had a heat-resisting buff for everyone, and told them to come to him, and that they didn't need to fear the fires. Then, he ordered Ogun to give the Infernals their last rites. Ogun asked Father Reese if he was ready, and he replied, anytime. The priest prayed, and Ogun finished his prayer while giving the Infernals their end. On the other hand, the Super Headbutt Cannon was primed, and the Honda missile was loaded. He said that every morning, he opens the window, basks in the morning sun, works to fulfill his duties, and returns to his family. Every night, he thinks that it was a good day, and that's what they need to do tomorrow and the next day after that. He attacked using the Honda Missile Super Killer Head Ram. Then, he shouted a sumo chant to Sukhoi, and Juggernaut said that the Titan would die, and the pillar would turn black, but wondered what would happen after that. According to Honda, he would give the Empire a beautiful tomorrow, but he only bounced off the Titan's body, which shocked everyone. In the next scene, Captain Pan is shouting, "Honda missile down," and Juggernaut is worried for his captain, while the Titan Infernal still stands firm. According to Oguro, he can't believe that Company 2's attack didn't work, and Kurono suggests that it's hopeless, so should they withdraw? Oguro asked him if they would just leave the monster like that, and where would they go? Kurono answered that he wasn't joking, and while Honda's headbutt might look stupid, it was the real deal, and if that didn't work, but before he could finish, Oguro said he wasn't asking for Kurono's opinion, which surprised him. He said he just wanted to say on the record that it was weird that his salary was the same whether he was playing with kids at the facility or fighting monsters, to which Oguro replied, "Welcome to corporate life." Because of that, Kurono said he was thinking of changing careers, and Oguro said if the country was still standing tomorrow, go ahead. Then, Kurono charged forward, and we shift to the top of the pillar. Fairy says that the sun has set, and because of that, the cataclysm that will change the laws of their world is about to begin. On the other hand, there's a news reporter broadcasting what happened at Tama Bay, and he also mentioned the eerily smiling moon that appeared. According to Fairy, the people should despair, and they shouldn't believe this is a night of hope. They should drive their collective unconscious towards the proper end, and at that moment, something suddenly shone in the sky, causing the news reporter and the cameraman to look up. The reporter instructed the cameraman to zoom in, but he told him to be quiet because he was already doing it. An old man with a fiery mustache and goatee was seen, and he recognized him as Raffles. It was the advent of the great pillar titan, Raffles the First, and fire was coming out from different parts of his body. He mentioned the word Latom, and after that, something happened in the sky, prompting Ogun to ask what was happening, if those were stars they were seeing, and what was happening to their world. Captain Pan replied that human thought was erupting, and according to the people with him, Raffles the First had arrived, and he had returned to save them. Nevertheless, he again said the word Latom, which was followed by an explosion where the fire force was. While recovering from the explosion, Captain Pan noticed something, and it was the gleaming of 5 points on the Titan Infernal, which was followed by explosions in the mountains. Because of the explosions, many people were injured, and some were asking why Raffles did that, while others thought they had angered him. Some said it was divine judgment, so they were asking for forgiveness from Raffles. In another place, the reporter was crying and calling for his mother, so the cameraman asked if he was okay. He added that he only suffered scratches, and what happened to him was worse. But the reporter shouted no, because he was becoming an infernal. The cameraman got scared and cursed while running away. When he was at a distance, he said that the reporter just had to become an infernal at such a time, and that he was always useless anyway. Then, he shouted that he didn't need a half-assed reporter to get news, and all he needed was his camera. At that moment, he saw something flying quickly in the sky, which he thought was a bird or airplane. However, it was Shinra, who said he was Stop the Cataclysm Man, so the cameraman thought he was a superhero. Then, Shinra saw Raffles the First flying in front of the Titan Infernal, so he asked if that was the patriarch of the Empire, the father, Raffles the First, and as he was saying that, Raffles looked at him. On the other hand, Fairy said that they, the Cataclysm Force, would stamp out all the hopes of the people, so they should abandon their hopeful beliefs and embrace the belief in despair. They should choose a savior to believe in. Then, we move to Kurono, who is sitting on the Titan Infernal, and he is humming music there because the hero and the prophet were face to face. At that moment, the matchbox of Company 8 also arrived, and Captain Obi ordered Shinra to focus on the Titan, and he replied yes. Some members of Company 2 were surprised that the 8th was there, and one even asked what the traitors were doing there. Vulcan answered him to set aside that kind of talk for another time. The Company 2 member then asked what they were planning because they couldn't just do whatever they wanted. On the other hand, Juggernaut said that he would provide cover for Shinra, but he replied that Juggernaut shouldn't worry because he would handle it, which surprised Juggernaut. Shinra said that because Adala was closer now, his pyrokinetic powers had strengthened, and he should be able to achieve light speed on his own. Juggernaut then asked if it was like when Shinra took out the demon in the Chinese peninsula using his lightspeed kick. In the next scene, Captain Obi was saying that the 8th would now handle putting the Infernals to rest, which surprised Company 2. At that time, something gleamed again in one part of the Titan, and another explosion occurred. Because of that, Obi told Shinra not to worry about them and just to take action. According to Captain Pan, if they continued to be blasted like that, they would be done for. So he told Karen that their duty was to set up a defense and ordered him to create a shield across the coastline. Karen asked if he meant the whole thing. Pan said that he would focus all his buffs on Karen and then needed the shield before the next attack. So Karen said he would try. Then, he took a breath and used the scale shield full force deployment. Ogun was surprised by this, and he was very proud of Pan and his comrade Karen, who was also proud of what he was doing. Before long, the Titan attacked again, and the firemen warned each other. However, they weren't hit because of Karen's shield, so Pan praised him, and he thanked the captain for the compliment. While he continued to hold the shield together, he tried to remember the spirit of their company, and behind him, his comrades were cheering him on, telling him that Company 4 leaves no one behind, and their duty is to protect the survivors. On the other hand, Shinra said that Karen seemed useful after all, and he was busy too, that he would start by putting Raffles to rest. However, he suddenly fell, so he wondered why his body suddenly became heavy. He tried to fly using his powers, but he was still falling. Then, he was suddenly given a heel kick to the back of his head by Fairy, but instead of going down further, he suddenly rose higher in the air. Fairy asked him how it felt to be kicked downward but to fly upward. Shinra was still trying to control himself using his powers, but Fairy suddenly drove his foot into his face. Then, Fairy bounced him around in the air and said that he could cast Shinra's gravitational pull into complete disarray and asked if it was pleasing to fall in every different direction. Shinra replied that he couldn't straighten himself out, and he suddenly stopped falling, so he wondered if he could regain control, but he suddenly fell again. In the next scene, Fairy drove another foot into Shinra's face, and he sent him flying high into the sky, showing that Shinra was in extreme pain. Sho suddenly appeared and stopped him with his sword sheath, then asked him what he was doing, and why didn't he just finish Fairy with a single flash. And he answered that he didn't even know which way he was falling, because one mistake at light speed and he would end up outside the atmosphere. He said he needed to make sure he was safe, but before he could finish, he realized that he was talking to Sho, so he hugged him tightly. Then, he balanced himself and asked Sho what he was doing there and if he was okay. Sho replied that they could talk later, so he focused his thoughts on the Titan. On the other hand, Fairy said while becoming invisible that the cast was now assembled, so his job was complete, and the preparations were perfect, and all the hopes of the people would be plucked. Sho said that for now, Shinra should just do his best, because the world needed to know that he was a hero. Shinra was surprised by this, and he said that he didn't get it, but being a hero was the reason why he was there. According to Sho, his brother is a true hero, and someone set him up to be a devil. Then, he called his brother and told him that the cataclysm is the explosion of human ideas, and if his actions can bring hope to humanity, their thoughts of hope will overflow, and the destruction of the world can be prevented. Shinra was shocked by this, and Sho added that he was not a devil, so he should let everyone know who the true hero is. Shinra replied that he knew he wasn't a devil, and that the world needed him to be a hero. He further added that Raffles was making people sinful and forcing them to atone, so what kind of hero was that? In the next scene, the brothers approached Raffles and the Titan, and while this was happening, the cameraman was filming them. He realized that they were going to fight Raffles, and other people seemed surprised as well. The cameraman cheered for the brothers, while the Titan prepared to attack again, so the Fire Force also got ready. The Titan attacked, heading in Shinra's direction. However, it didn't reach the ground, because the attack was suddenly deflected. This surprised Juggernaut, and we learned that it was Shinra's doing. Then, he attacked the Titan, resulting in a large explosion, which made Raffles look in that direction. On the other hand, Juggernaut realized it was Shinra who did it, and Shinra said it had been a long time since he tried the lightspeed kick, and it seemed he had missed. Then, Raffles said "Latom" again, causing an explosion that hit Shinra and sent him flying. Nevertheless, he recovered using his powers and flew away. Shinra flew upward and assessed the situation. He saw that Raffles was doing something to his body and gradually disappearing until he completely merged with the Titan. Then, he immediately said "Latom" and opened his mouth. He released what looked like missiles from his mouth, and Vulcan said that the spikes had disappeared, while Obi said he was picking up 8 new heat sources and they were strong. On the other hand, Shinra was now surrounded by what Raffles released from his mouth, and they had become demons. This shocked Vulcan and Obi, and Maki said it was already difficult to defeat one demon. So how about 8 more? Because of this, Hinawa ordered them to prepare supporting fire, while Fairy was grinning. Then, Shinra was shown with a serious look on his face, while Raffles signaled the demons to attack, so Shinra prepared his light speed. In the next scene, there were multiple explosions in the sky, and in the aftermath, Vulcan was impressed because all heat sources had been extinguished. While that was happening, Arthur looked proud and asked if Shinra had overcome the devil. He was grinning and releasing flames from his feet that spelled out the word hero, and he was making the hand sign that Benimaru taught him. According to Licht, Shinra's vibe was different, while Sho said his brother was a true hero, and Shinra said that a true hero finishes things in one blow. He then told Raffles that it was time to finish it, and it wouldn't take more than one hit. Then, Licht called Shinra, which made him stop what he was doing. Licht said that he just remembered the data he gathered about Shinra's light speed kick from the Chinese peninsula, and if the shockwave reached them, they would sustain serious injuries. This seemed to surprise Shinra, and Sister Iris also heard it, immediately starting to pray afterward. Flames seemed to form around Iris, as she prayed for them to be granted the sun's protection. Then we were shown the flames from Adala, as she continued to pray. Captain Pan wondered what that light surrounding them was, and Karen asked if it was one of the captain's buffs, but he replied that it wasn't from him. This also surprised Shinra, while Licht realized that it was coming from Iris, as he remembered it resembling the miracle they saw with Dragon a while back. Meanwhile, according to Sho, the light they are seeing is coming from an Adala burst, so he told his brother that it seemed he didn't need to worry about the shockwave. Because of this, Shinra realized that the sister had awakened as the 8th pillar, and he said that it felt good because he had the prayers and devotion of the sister on his side. However, according to Raffles, he would show the Tokyo Empire the path to salvation, and as he was saying this, the cameraman was filming him. The time was near, and their end is now at hand. They would return to the great flame of fire. Nevertheless, Shinra said that wasn't salvation, and a savior was called a savior because they were supposed to save the world. As he said this, Ogun was cheering him on, as was Juggernaut. Of course, the entire Company 8 was as well, and Captain Obi told him to finish it and come home. Roger that, he replied as he prepared to attack. Then, he charged forward using his light speed skill, and in an instant, a hole appeared in Raffles' forehead, because Shinra went through it, to which Fairy grinned at. Meanwhile, Iris finished her prayer with the word La Tome, and there was a huge explosion where Raffles was. The shockwave reached Company 8, and when it was over, Shinra realized that he had defeated Raffles because power was pouring out from his body, and that's what Maki and Hinawa thought too. Conro, Benimaru, and Hibana were impressed, and Conro and Benimaru agreed that it was something else. In another place, it seemed that Kurono didn't like that Shinra had become so strong. In the next scene, black substances came out from the hole in Raffles' forehead, and Shinra just watched it. According to Ogun, Shinra was a true hero, while Vulcan reported to Obi that the battle was over, so he praised the hero. In another place, there were people who didn't like what happened in the fight between Shinra and Raffles. They couldn't accept Raffles' defeat, so they mourned him. Then, Raffles was shown sinking into the ocean, and Fairy said that was the end of hope, and because of that, humanity would sink into despair. While that was happening, the cameraman was crying tears of joy, and some were calling Shinra a devil. Those were the people devoted to Raffles, and they wanted to kill Shinra, continuously calling him a devil. Nevertheless, Shinra knew nothing about this, and Fairy told him that he will never become a hero, and that was goodbye. Then, Vulcan reported to Captain Obi that Shinra had disappeared. Captain Obi was shocked that Shinra suddenly disappeared. Meanwhile, Tamaki was also surprised that Iris was gone. Arrow was also puzzled because her commander Sho was missing, while Licht was wondering what on earth was happening. Then, we moved to the base of the White Clads, and Sister Sumire said that all is as it should be, and they also needed to make for the pillars. Yona would take care of the rest, and he said until the day of ruin, while Haumea had a wide grin. In the next scene, Haumea, Sister Sumire, and Inca had vanished. Jonas said that the hero of humanity has vanished, the holy child, born to a virgin, which was Shinra. If he had vanished like his mother and brother 12 years ago, he might have become a legend, but he remained on the surface. Shinra didn't become a hero of legend, and he lived as a devil, and now, the hero has been snuffed out and is called a devil by the people. All that's left is to insert the key into Amaterasu, and when that planet becomes a flaming star, there will be no more saviors. Then, we move to a place where there's no electricity because there are blackouts all across the empire, so the fire force is panicking about whether their comms are still okay and what's happening. Because of this, Ogun called Captain Pan because there was a message from the station about mass outbreaks of infernals. On the other hand, Vulcan reported to Company 8 that he couldn't find Shinra and Iris. Tamaki said she understood that Shinra was a pillar, but why would Iris disappear? So Arthur said maybe the two were just hiding while he was looking under their matchbox. Licht replied that the answer was simple, so they looked at him, and he said that Sister Iris was the 8th and final pillar. They were shocked by this, and Licht added that their blackout was caused by the disappearance of the first pillar, and the functioning of Amaterasu might have stopped, so the other disappearances like Shinra's and Iris's might be connected. The real question was where the two had gone. At that moment, a white-clad member arrived and said that Shinra and Iris were in Adala. Hinawa was surprised by the arrival of the white-clad member, and we learned that it was Arrow, and she repeated that the two were in Adala, and they were in a race against time because the cataclysm was in its final stage. They didn't have time to fight, but Tamaki was angrily shouting that they wouldn't believe her because she just showed up and was saying all sorts of things. She was even the one who took Captain Hoyan's arm, and Tamaki still remembered what happened to Lieutenant Rekka. Arrow replied asking what was one arm compared to the fate of the world, and they didn't have time for that. Maki asked her what she knew, and she answered that like the disappearance of the 4th and 8th, the 3rd had also disappeared, and her duty was to protect the life of Sho Kusakabe, the 3rd pillar. Then, we go back to the past, where Sho was telling Arrow that if Shinra could become a hero to the people of the world, they might be able to help him stop the cataclysm. However, if that failed, all pillars would likely be transported to Adala. Arrow tried to reason, but Sho told her to listen, and said that she shouldn't lose hope, because as long as Shinra exists, the collective unconscious would not lead to death. So she replied, "Yes, sir." In the next scene, we return to the present, and Arrow said that with the disappearance of the pillars, all that was left was to press the switch to activate the cataclysm. So Obi wondered what switch. Arrow added that there was still hope, and they just needed to prevent the activation of the switch. Obi asked where that switch was, and Vulcan replied that he would take a wild guess, that it was in Amaterasu. Then he asked Arrow if he was right, while Obi asked him if he was sure. He answered that Dr. Giovanni wanted the key to Amaterasu, so there must be a connection. Because of that, Obi told everyone to get into the matchbox, and Arrow said to let her accompany them. Because of this, Obi called Maki and Arthur to watch her, and Arthur said, "No funny business," while Maki said they wouldn't give her a chance to do that. Then, Obi asked her what she had said. Was it, "Don't lose hope," because those were strong words? She replied that those were the commander's words, which Obi realized was Sho, and he said that as long as the world was still standing, they wouldn't lose hope. Vulcan, who was hyped up, said they were rolling out, and the objective was Amaterasu, so they left. Back to the White Clads, Jonas said they had the key, so Giovanni said they should go to Amaterasu. That night, Ogun noticed something while riding his hoverboard, and it was Company 8's matchbox. So he went down to see what was happening. When he asked why they were in a hurry, Hinawa replied that there was an emergency. Arthur called out to him saying they were heading to Amaterasu, and he would join them. Ogun was surprised by this invitation and seemed to have no choice but to go along. So he ended up joining them. The signage leading to their destination became visible, and the driver, Vulcan, said they were getting close. He thought the place was surrounded by infernals. Hinawa responded that they should leave that to other companies. From above, Ogun asked Arthur if he had seen how many infernals were heading in their direction. Arthur answered yes, and there were many of them. Ogun became curious about what they were doing that was more important than putting infernals to rest. Arthur then mentioned that the White Clads are making for his castle of Camelot. Inside, Arrow said that the White Clads were moving toward Amaterasu to complete the final stage of the cataclysm. Arthur smiled when he finally saw what he called his castle, the Amaterasu. They stopped there, thinking they were the first to arrive. Arrow was confident that the White Clads would come because they needed to insert the key. Lick got excited because he might finally get answers about the mystery of the white arrows from the Chinese peninsula. Meanwhile, Vulcan just stared at Amaterasu. When Arthur asked if Vulcan's ancestors had constructed that castle, he said yes. Vulcan stated that it was impossible for Amaterasu to become a tool of destruction. Captain Obi said they would set up a defensive line there and ordered Vulcan to survey the interior. Vulcan replied that his equipment was in the matchbox. Obi hates to say it, but they didn't have enough manpower for an escort, so he needed to infiltrate alone. Vulcan told them not to worry as he had backup inbound. Just then, Yu and Lisa arrived on a bike. Time was running out, so they needed to act quickly. When Yu asked what they would do, Vulcan said they would finally see his ancestors' legacy. Suddenly, some guards called their attention. They said the area was strictly off-limits and asked what their business was. Obi answered that they were there to inspect Amaterasu, but the guard wasn't aware of that. Hinawa signaled to Maki, but when the guards recognized them as the traitors from Company 8, the two attacked simultaneously. When the guards fell, Vulcan used his spider net to immobilize them. Ogun was very surprised at how they handled things. Tamaki said they weren't usually too brazen about it, but yes, that's how they operated. Meanwhile, Vulcan mentioned there was only one way to enter. Therefore, if they were going to set up a defensive line, it should be near the entrance. Obi was concerned about this, but Vulcan assured him he would be fine. He called Lisa and Yu to move, and they followed him. When Licht asked what their captain's plan was, he said it was to meet them head-on. Licht questioned whether he had considered ambushing them. Obi replied that an ambush carried a high risk of failure. The core of this battle was to keep them away from Amaterasu because once they got inside, the fight would be over. Licht then became worried when he realized Obi was determined for direct conflict. Since they had been labeled as traitors, they had been holding back and slinking around. But at that moment, Obi declared they would go all out because the entire world was at stake. Hinawa said he and Arrow would open fire the moment they saw the enemy. If they managed to push in, Maki and Tamaki would attack. They would use their mobility to disrupt the enemy forces. Meanwhile, Ogun and Arthur would focus on hunting the big shots. They remembered their comrades, so Tamaki said they would stop the cataclysm and bring back Shinra and Iris. Arthur was in serious mode when he said it was time. This was because white-clad members Karen and Inca had arrived. Karen was surprised when he noticed the fire force and questioned what they were doing there, as it wasn't part of the plan. Inca responded that it was a foreseeable circumstance. She told him not to comment on every trivial matter. Anyway, they now had all the pawns they needed. Behind them, many enormous infernals were ready to fight. Arthur also noticed that Dragon was there too. Surrounded by numerous blazing infernals, they began firing at them to reduce their numbers. Hinawa noticed something was controlling them, and Arrow responded that it was Ritsu's Necropyro. Because of this, he urged Arrow to help prevent the enemies from getting closer. Arrow positioned herself and said he should too. Hinawa fired and used his bullet speed control ability. This increased the propellant force to deal more damage. Ogun was impressed, saying it wasn't just an ordinary shotgun. Tamaki explained that the flame was the soul's breath and the black smoke was the soul's release. On the other side, Arrow used her capability to create bows and arrows made of flames. She attacked using cluster arrows and released numerous arrows at the enemy. As a result, a large explosion occurred in the area. They congratulated each other for a job well done. On the other hand, Maki ordered Tamaki to take down the infernals that survived the barrage, and she complied. Arrow suddenly realized something. Inca was preparing to attack. Then she called upon a massive creature called a Great Infernal. They became concerned upon seeing them. Tamaki was annoyed, wondering how many lives they were just toying with. She attacked, and Maki said they would handle the regular infernals first. They would leave the giants to the lieutenant and Arrow. Hinawa shot at the large enemies, with Arrow helping him. Karen then became irritated after being hit by Arrow's attack. He charged forward at Arrow and called her a traitor. However, before he could get close, someone suddenly punched him in the face. He didn't expect the powerful punch, which sent him flying. But he still managed to spin around to counterattack. It was Ogun who confronted him, saying Karen would have to get through him first. The fists of the two collided, causing Karen to absorb the energy from Ogun's attack. This made him smile, thinking he now had a counter against Ogun. But he didn't anticipate Ogun launching a series of consecutive attacks. The impact of Ogun's unleashed punch was extremely powerful, which surprised Karen. Ogun said he wouldn't give him an opening to counter. Once again, he delivered a powerful punch that finally knocked Karen to the ground. But despite that, Karen nimbly jumped back and bounced around to gain momentum. Ogun became concerned because it seemed his punches hadn't done much damage. Karen remarked that it was like a storm of fists and wondered how many hits he had taken. Ogun said he couldn't understand what the White Clads wanted to accomplish. Karen replied with a smile that the whole point was ruin. After all, they were human. The collective unconscious, the collective thoughts of people, was asking for that. But Ogun countered that even if that's what humanity wanted, the mission of fire soldiers was to protect people. Karen responded that it was Ogun's ego speaking. He asked if Ogun had any idea how many people in the world wanted to die. Nevertheless, Ogun said they continued to live, and they were happy they chose that. He added that he wouldn't stand by and watch Karen destroy that opportunity. Karen questioned Ogun's statement about people being happy to live, saying that was wishful thinking. Therefore, he told Ogun to stop interfering. Ogun was puzzled by this response and asked why Karen said that. Karen explained it was because Haumea had been hearing it since she was born. And now with the cataclysm approaching, she still hears it. The true nature of people. The pitch darkness in the depths of every person's heart. The hopelessness of humanity was tied to Adala. Haumea had continued to observe this until it broke her. The collective unconscious was bursting with the deep black thoughts of humanity. Karen asked if Ogun could imagine it. While other children cried for their mothers, that's what Haumea had to deal with. She was tuned to the filthy, greedy, and murderous thoughts of mankind from a young age. A child who didn't even know right from left. And young Haumea had endured it all. He wondered if Ogun thinks someone like her would want to continue living. Because of that, Karen would ensure the cataclysm proceeded to free Haumea from that hell. Ogun then removed his uniform. He said he had heard in reports that Karen was strong, but it seemed he also had a strong heart, which Ogun respected. Karen was surprised by this. Nevertheless, Ogun stated that he was a fire soldier. Therefore, it was his duty to stop the cataclysm. At the entrance, Arthur was just sitting while Captain Obi was busy fighting a giant infernal. He attacked it using the core annihilating pile bunker, which hit its chest hard. Meanwhile, Arthur was only concentrating on his position. When Obi checked on Ogun, he said he was fine and that they should leave Karen to him. He was all fired up to fight him, while there were still many infernals surrounding the area. The cataclysm is happening, and Karen said he didn't care how many more people they threw at them. When Ogun attacked him, he said it was his duty and responsibility to protect people. He unleashed a series of punches that Karen blocked, but he responded by asking who cared about his duty. He raised his foot and stomped, causing an extremely powerful explosion that Ogun avoided. He said his duty originated from the last cataclysm. Karen prepared to attack again, and this time, he clapped his hands. Once more, it caused a massive explosion. Nevertheless, Ogun didn't back down because he quickly jumped toward him to punch again. But when he hit Karen's head and cracked his neck, it triggered another huge explosion that hit Ogun. He became annoyed when he was thrown back and wondered if Karen was a walking time bomb. Karen replied that rescuing and saving people sounded good, but there was also salvation in destruction. Ogun prepared as Karen attacked again. He created an extremely powerful explosion, but when the fire subsided, he was surprised that Ogun had disappeared from in front of him. It turned out he had quickly moved behind him to punch his face again. He asked if Karen's plan was just to blow everything up. He punched him again with his left fist, causing him to be thrown back. Ogun added that the immigrants in that country were there because of his ancestors. Therefore, he would never abandon them. The story goes that his ancestor was a ship captain, and when the cataclysm came, he took in anyone regardless of their race or status. Because of the cataclysm, the seas became stormy. So the passengers couldn't help but feel afraid. His ancestors sang reggae songs about love to them. He gave courage and peace of mind to those present and carried them across the sea. He boarded so many people on his ship, including the person known as Raffles 1. He brought them all there. That's why he became a fire soldier. It's his responsibility to protect the people his ancestor brought over, and he's determined to defend them until the end, because that's his duty. On the other side, Hinawa mentioned something about Ogun Montgomery. He knew that he was a descendant of the immigrant hero who saved Raffles 1. Truthfully, he would have preferred him for Company 8 over Shinra or Arthur. Maki called his attention because of what he said, while Arthur just glanced over. Captain Obi interjected that what he said was wrong, because the truth was that he and Shinra were actually their first picks. But Hinawa revealed that the captain was the most disappointed that they didn't get Ogun. Obi told him to stop. While still seated, Arthur admitted that Ogun was extremely impressive, so he couldn't blame them. Ogun told him to just get ready because they would take Shinra back. Arthur smiled at this, while Ogun used his flamey ink. He ignited the flames throughout his body and said, "Let's do this." Meanwhile, Karen also prepared as Ogun charged forward quickly toward him. Ogun knew that he would just absorb his attack and return it, but Karen anticipated that. He avoided his head and caught his arm, because something was telling him that he shouldn't take that first hit. He smiled and suddenly slammed Ogun's body to the ground with extreme force. He was even trembling because of it. Karen raised his foot, which made Ogun anxious. His foot stomp was once again a trigger for an extremely powerful explosion. The Company 8 members couldn't do anything to help. Karen looked at them and said one down, asking who would be next among them. Karen demonstrated tremendous strength, and Ogun was engulfed in flames. Karen challenged the fire force, saying he would face anyone. Tamaki was troubled when she saw what happened to Ogun. Karen suddenly called out to the hooded one and asked if he was game to fight him. Maki asked who could possibly fight against that kind of enemy. Arrow said no one could if they attacked head-on. The best way to deal with him, she said, was to not play his game. Arthur looked over while holding his weapon. Surprisingly, Ogun suddenly emerged from the blazing fire. He spoke to Arthur and told him to just prepare for Dragon. He would take care of this. Karen was shocked by what he said and asked him to repeat it. But Ogun just smiled and bravely faced him. Everyone was concerned and wondered how he would confront him. In Ogun's mind, he thought about how Karen was eating up each of his punches. And noticing that he would counter again, he realized Karen couldn't absorb energy and expend it simultaneously. So, he was determined to counter his counter. He hit him directly in the face before using his flamey ink technique again to increase his strength. Nevertheless, Karen just gave him a powerful blow to the stomach. He mentioned that when using a regular punch, he could easily attack while maintaining the absorbed energy. Ogun took terrible damage from this. Karen released enormous flames. As a result, Ogun was completely knocked down. He was too strong, and Ogun wondered how he could stop a monster like him. While lying on the ground, he remembered a discussion among friends about whether heroes or knights were cooler. That was between Arthur and Shinra. He had tried to stop the two from fighting then because they were getting along so good. In a flashback, when they were still studying, students were introducing themselves one by one in front. When it was his turn, Shinra introduced himself and said he wanted to become a fire soldier and a hero. This caught Ogun's attention. Outside, while walking, someone called out to Shinra. When he turned around, he recognized him as the knight guy. Suddenly, a girl called out to Arthur and asked if he really was a knight. He admitted it, and the girls were impressed. So they said that if they ever had a problem, they hoped he would save them. He replied that he would rush to them whenever they needed him. The girls were delighted by his promise, and many found him cute. Some even thought he was so cute they wanted him as a pet. Shinra was surprised by what he witnessed and teased him about being popular with women. But Arthur wasn't surprised by this because he was a knight. Ogun suddenly arrived and asked if they were already making friends. Shinra recognized him as Ogun Montgomery. He was number one among all rookies in both written and practical skills. He replied that it was only in tests. But individual results weren't important because they were a team. The two were impressed because he was like a model fire soldier. Ogun added that what a team could use were heroic guys like them. Because of that, they thought he was also the type of person who would cover for screw-ups like them. Shinra asked him if he was a good guy. He didn't know what to answer except that he wasn't a bad guy. He asked if it was okay for them to be friends, and they agreed. Other students noticed the three of them. Shinra, who had blasted during the practical exam, Arthur with the strongest firepower, and Ogun who had the highest scores, were now together. One thought that the best really attracts the best after all. In the back, Young Karen could be seen staring at his hand and curious about what they did. Suddenly, someone appeared beside him and asked if he had heard the rumors. When he asked about what, he said it was about Shinra. They were saying he was a devil because he killed his mother and young brother. The man couldn't believe someone like him would become a fire soldier or a big hero. He said it was impossible. Karen was troubled by the thought that he was a devil. He couldn't believe it, but the person who told him added that Ogun seemed okay. He just hoped he wouldn't be fooled. He was worried for him. Because of that, Kareem's mood changed. It wasn't long before news spread throughout the academy. People were saying it wasn't just a rumor, but the truth. As a result, the previously unbothered Shinra became concerned. Consequently, he smiled when he became anxious. When others heard about him being a matricidal devil, they were creeped out because of his creepy smile. Suddenly, someone placed a hand on Shinra's shoulder to check on him. With his awkward smile still present, he said yes. It turned out to be Ogun who told him to ignore them. Shinra asked if he didn't believe those rumors, and Ogun asked him back if they were true. Shinra denied it and was about to explain, but Ogun responded that he knew they weren't true. He might not know the details, but he said he wouldn't doubt his friends over those rumors. Besides, they might still be assigned to the same company. Shinra was still grinning, so Ogun advised him to stop smiling like that. He replied that he couldn't help it and that it was a bad habit. Because of that, Ogun told him he was weird. The next day, other students were impressed by Ogun, who was holding a basketball, because he didn't quit. They were saying that whichever team had Ogun would surely win. He replied that if one person couldn't do the job, then two could. That was the beauty of team sports. He was surprised when he suddenly heard people discussing heroes and knights. Even others nearby became curious. It was Shinra and Arthur arguing once again. At the court, Shinra and Arthur were arguing about who was truly cooler. For Shinra, of course it was heroes, but Arthur couldn't accept this because knights were supposedly better. The discussion between the two seemed endless until Ogun intervened. He was puzzled because they were getting along well earlier, so he asked Arthur what had happened. Arthur replied that he had gotten the ball. It was for the children at the park. Ogun couldn't understand this and looked at Shinra, who said he would explain. After sharing the details of the story, Ogun couldn't believe that children at the park had asked who was cooler, a knight or a hero. And just because of that, they had started fighting. Ogun frowned because it was extremely stupid, but the two insisted it wasn't. While the two continued to fight and overpower each other, Shinra said he would never be friends with someone like Arthur. According to him, Arthur was always bragging about being a knight and belittling others, which irritated Shinra. Arthur called him a dumbass in response. But Shinra replied that Arthur was the dumbass, a dumbass knight. Arthur became furious and called him a devil. They both paused, and Ogun called Arthur's attention. Arthur became curious because of Shinra's expression. Shinra had once again displayed his creepy smile when Arthur said he was never a hero, but rather a devil. Shinra's anxious smile wouldn't go away, and Arthur walked out, saying pathetic. Ogun was concerned for Shinra, so he suddenly threw the ball at him. Shinra caught it and returned to his normal self. Ogun said that since Shinra was already there, he should join them in playing basketball. The others hadn't expected this. If Shinra was going to play, they said they were out. They didn't want to play with the devil, and everyone backed away, which puzzled them. Nevertheless, they continued playing. Only Ogun and Shinra remained, and Shinra was visibly tired while Ogun kept pushing him. Shinra couldn't stop Ogun. Ogun explained that he had an advantage in basketball, and in a one-on-one game, Shinra didn't stand a chance. However, Ogun added that basketball wasn't a one-on-one game. Shinra was surprised by this. Ogun clarified that they were a team. If one couldn't do the job, then the two of them could do it together. Shinra was curious if Ogun was trying to believe in him. Ogun was shocked by this before suddenly laughing at what Shinra had said, which Shinra couldn't understand. Ogun patted him and said that he didn't just believe, he knew. Shinra wasn't the person others claimed him to be. Shinra hadn't expected that. Ogun added that despite what Arthur had said, Arthur probably knew that too. Shinra couldn't accept this because Arthur was a jerk, popular but extremely idiotic. Ogun then cheered him up, saying he could still change the course of the game, though the situation seemed hopeless. Back in the present, Ogun struggled to stand despite Karen's assertion that it was hopeless, and he had no chance. Ogun clarified that he wouldn't give up. Once again, Ogun attacked and punched Karen, but it seemed to have no effect on him. When Karen countered and punched him in the face, Ogun was sent flying. Kareem punched him in the stomach and grabbed him by the hair. He held Ogun by the head and twisted his neck, followed by another punch to the face accompanied by a powerful explosion. This sent Ogun flying far away. He was already bleeding from Karen's successive attacks. Karen just smiled and asked if Ogun was going to cry, calling him a little baby. Once more, Ogun used his flamey ink despite his body being visibly battered. Because of this, he managed to stand up again. But Karen knew that only the flames on Ogun's body were enabling him to do so. Again, Karen grabbed him by the head and said there was nothing left in his tank. While holding Ogun's head with his right hand, Karen's left hand had 2 fingers pointed at Ogun's chest. Karen said all Ogun needed to do was sit down and be quiet. If he had done that, he could have lived peacefully in his last days. Karen then transferred his energy to his fingers to release powerful flames into Ogun's chest. But something unexpected happened. He coughed blood. Ogun simply stated that he wasn't alone. The fire soldiers were a team. Karen had been severely hit in the side, causing him to bleed and lose flesh. It had come from a fire soldier's gun. Karen couldn't believe what had happened and couldn't help but fall to his knees in pain. It was Hinawa who had fired the shot. While on the ground, Ogun said that if you can't handle something alone, then you can do it when there are 2 of you. That was the ironclad law of fire soldiers. Moreover, the 8th was a seasoned company, so they definitely wouldn't miss that opportunity. Karen couldn't believe he had sustained such an injury. Meanwhile, Captain Obi approached Ogun and congratulated him on a good job, and the same for Hinawa. Hinawa apologized because it could have been a killing shot, but he couldn't risk hitting Ogun as well. Karen was still kneeling while holding his side as a powerful flame approached. It even caught the nearby infernals, and someone had ordered them to get out of the way. Because of this, Arthur's eyes opened. It was Dragon, who declared that the so-called guardians were extremely pathetic. The ground thundered with each of Dragon's footsteps, and everyone could feel his presence. Meanwhile, Arthur had opened one eye as Dragon approached him while he was still sitting near the entrance of Amaterasu. Dragon's face was serious as he stared at Arthur, who finally stood up. Arthur remarked that it was good Dragon had come, who asked if he hadn't learned his lesson yet. Arthur prepared himself and declared that if he was going to make Slayer of Dragons his name, then it should be now. That was why he had come there. Dragon called him a damn fool, saying that no one could stand in his way. Nevertheless, Arthur stood firmly in front of him. He drew out his weapon, Excalibur, and prepared to face Dragon. When Dragon asked what it was, Arthur proudly proclaimed that it was forged by the master blacksmith Vulcan from the body of a fallen star. It was the newly reborn true Excalibur, and he used it against Dragon. The sword pierced Dragon's body, but instead of defeating him, Dragon just smiled and praised its fine cut. Arthur had planned to end the battle with just one strike, but he had expected that it wouldn't be easy against Dragon. Dragon thought that there was nothing Arthur couldn't cut with that swordsmanship. Anything, except for Dragon himself. Dragon released intense flames toward Arthur, yet Arthur managed to dodge. While Arthur was in the air, Dragon shouted for him to burn. Arthur countered with his violet flash. He swiftly approached Dragon, holding the activated Excalibur in his hand. Meanwhile, the fire caused by Dragon was enormous, and he was just waiting to see what would happen to his opponent. However, Arthur suddenly disappeared, leaving Dragon wondering where he had gone. As it turned out, Arthur was already behind him, poised to slash Dragon's body. Still, it seemed to have no effect on Dragon, who merely prepared to punch Arthur with tremendous force. The impact was so strong that Arthur was sent flying downward, landing where the infernals were walking. He even hit and sliced some of them on his way down. Nevertheless, Arthur managed a good landing. Dragon also descended to confront him. Inside, while Vulcan, Yu, and Lisa were together, they heard a noise. Vulcan thought that the battle had already begun. Therefore, they should hurry and do their part. Vulcan added that they wouldn't let them get away with what they've done. He urged them to find the keyhole. The surroundings were extremely dark, and although this was a legacy of Vulcan's ancestors, and he wanted to explore it further, they no longer had time. When Lisa asked what he knew about the key, Vulcan thought it was an ignition for the cataclysm, but he was still thinking about the sequence of numbers. They continued walking straight inside, surrounded by steel pipes and tubes. They observed their surroundings to find a clue. You praised the incredible technology. And Vulcan agreed with him. At a glance, it didn't seem to be anything more than support mechanics for power generation. And based on what they knew about Amaterasu from the Chinese peninsula, the keyhole they were looking for might be in the center. According to the map drawn by Joker, it was ahead of them. It was on the other side of that gate. Lisa was curious about how they would open such a huge gate without juice. Vulcan then called Yu, who was carrying an ultra battery, and Vulcan thought that would be enough to power it up. He connected the battery to open it, and before long, they succeeded, and the gate slowly opened. Suddenly, Giovanni appeared behind them saying what a gentleman he was for opening the door for him. The three were shocked when they heard him. Lisa quickly used her ignition ability to manifest an octopus-like tentacle to hit him. Giovanni called out her name. Vulcan was greatly surprised at how he had gotten in there when there were people guarding the entrance. He replied that who would know when a bug had gotten in. He was troubled and asked what they were going to do now. He answered that they would handle it because there was no one else to do it. You felt something strange in his chest. In his thoughts, it was as if Giovanni had strangled him. When Vulcan asked if he was okay, he smiled and answered yes, saying he was just grateful. He said Vulcan saved him. Vulcan and Lisa, as well as Arthur and the sister. All of Company 8 were there for him. And thanks to all of them, he was still alive. They were the reason for that. He added that even the doctors and nurses used their abilities to help him. There was so much love in that world. And the near-fatal wound that he gave him reminded him of all that. So he bowed and thanked Giovanni for hurting him. Vulcan was annoyed by this and said they understood and urged him to move aside, which he did. Giovanni transformed and said that he should be the one expressing his gratitude to them, because Vulcan's family had safeguarded something so precious for 250 years. And what he was referring to was the key to the Amaterasu. Vulcan insisted that it was his family's property. Giovanni was sure he knew what it was and answered that of course he knew what was inside it. Meanwhile, Lisa and Giovanni continued exchanging attacks. Vulcan mentioned that it was Pi, and he answered spot on. Pi was a spell of destruction that the evangelist had worked on since antiquity. Vulcan couldn't believe it when he said it was a spell. Giovanni added that it was a spell that humanity chanted and taught for generations. And now, because the idea of destruction was firmly planted in their minds, they had finished solving Pi. Vulcan was very shocked because Pi had no end. Therefore, there was no way to solve it. But Giovanni insisted that the problem was solved during the last cataclysm. However, Vulcan replied that Pi is still Pi. It doesn't change. Giovanni suddenly asked if he hadn't noticed the moon and stars floating in the sky. The very physics of that world had already changed. The last cataclysm didn't just usher in the age of spontaneous human combustion. Because of it, Pi had become solvable. And now that it was solved, finally, they could bring the evolution of mankind to its terminus. When Vulcan asked what this meant, he explained that there's a theory that the final stage of a creature's evolution is ruin, extinction. And that theory was quite correct. Humanity was waiting for the end, the terminus of their evolution. And their ultimate goal was longing for death. That yearning means the cataclysm, their ultimate aim. Vulcan couldn't accept this and merely called them a death cult. Giovanni just laughed at what he said. To clarify, what he called a cult came from the same place as all religions. He asked he knows who bestowed that on humanity. Vulcan then realized that what he was saying was all planned by the evangelist. The evangelist had planted the end in every person's mind, deep into their consciousness. The evangelist had also planted sun worship in their minds. She inclined them towards an image of annihilation, to return to the flame and return to the sun. When Vulcan asked why the sun and what it had to do with death, Giovanni just laughed again and said that it was the second Earth. The sun hanging in the sky above them was, long, long ago, born because of a cataclysm. Vulcans couldn't believe what he said. Meanwhile, Shinra couldn't figure out where he was. He wondered if that was already the Adala. He searched for the pillars, Sho, and the others. He was very confused about the cataclysm because he knew he needed to stop it. Back to Giovanni. He said that all the pillars had already gone to Adala. There, they became pillars that bridged Adala to that realm, tying them together. And there, people's thoughts became aligned with destruction. That became its true essence. He said that world would become the second sun. You couldn't believe what he heard and said it was impossible. But Vulcan said that the moon already had a face. At that point, they had no idea what else could possibly happen. He spoke to Licht, who was connected through the device in his ear. He was just in the matchbox and said he heard all of that. Though it was hard to believe, if they considered the findings of Company 8, he might be telling the truth. When he looked at the battle outside, he said it was very busy there, but they would find a way to reach them. The fight between the Fire Force members and the huge infernals outside was already intense. But he said, just hang on. Giovanni told Lisa to step aside, who now looked like a gigantic octopus because of her ability. She didn't agree and blocked him. Nearly in tears, she said that Vulcan's ancestor built that place. Therefore, she wouldn't allow them to use it as a tool of destruction. Giovanni said that from the beginning, the Amaterasu was intended to be a tool that would bring the cataclysm. Upon hearing that, Vulcan asked that if that were the case, why did his family hide the key? He answered that 250 years ago, his family, the Joseph clan, helped them build the Amaterasu. Vulcan then asked who they were. In a flashback, while the Amaterasu was being built, it was said that the founders of Hijima spearheaded the group that would build it. The ancestors of both Giovanni and Vulcan participated in this project. Both of their ancestors were responsible for power generation. However, Vulcan's family, the Josephs, did something. His ancestor heard something from a container there. He approached to find out what the sound coming from it was. He was very shocked and asked who was there. The one inside repeatedly asked for help, causing him to think. Giovanni called them fools because his ancestor hid the key for the true power of the Amaterasu. Therefore, their line had been monitoring their families since that day and just waiting for the right opportunity. Vulcan couldn't accept what he said about monitoring. He said he killed them when they made them infernals. Giovanni replied that he afforded fools who denied the will of Adala liberation by flame. Lisa attacked him again and called him a monster. But Giovanni insisted they gave them the power of science. He couldn't believe they would direct their foolishness against him. Lisa was in tears when Giovanni approached her. When he got close to her, she saw many lights like eyes that made sounds. So, she quickly backed away and attacked it. When it fell, Vulcan approached her and asked if she was okay. Vulcan asked what was in his body, and she answered that they were all bugs. It was made up of many various bugs. That's why Giovanni was enveloped in a buzzing sound. Lisa said that his wriggling blackness was just all insects, which is why she couldn't stop trembling. Vulcan comforted her and said it was okay and she was with him. Lisa thought Giovanni was controlling the bugs somehow. Vulcan had a plan and thought they could do it together. He also prepared you who was behind, who then rummaged through the bag he was carrying to look for something. Giovanni attacked again and Lisa countered it. Giovanni called Lisa, Feeler, and asked if she remembered. Because of that, Lisa felt lost and asked Vulcan for help. He told her to insert her tentacle into the object in front of him. Vulcan explained that he had researched about Adala bugs. They act by sensing magnetic field fluctuations through organs that humans lack. So he would destroy his ability to detect and command them. Giovanni was surprised when he heard that. Meanwhile, Lisa had inserted a tentacle into the object on the ground, and because of that, the black thing covering Giovanni that was made up of insects seemed to disappear. He wondered what happened because his body disintegrated, causing the little that remained of him to fall to the ground. Vulcan said that Lisa's power disrupted the magnetic field. As a result, his bugs scattered. When Vulcan saw his true form, he called him pathetic. Giovanni found this absolutely hilarious. He couldn't believe they were calling him pathetic. Him who kept knocking before crossing. He said that Vulcan had missed the mark. Giovanni's body buzzed again, which startled Vulcan. It didn't take long for his form to return. Giovanni thought he needed to give him the gift of fear for the bounty that was bestowed upon him. Vulcan couldn't understand what he meant, while Giovanni just kept laughing. On the side, something seemed to be troubling you. He said there was a bug. Vulcan and Lisa became concerned for him, while Giovanni was still laughing hard. You screamed in pain as if there was something inside him. He was gradually transforming and couldn't accept it. Outside, Captain Obi seemed to sense something while fighting the infernals. When Hinoa asked what it was, he ordered him to fall back from the line and go inside for now. Arrow said she would take care of it, and so Hinoa followed the captain. He relied on her help. Carrying his equipment, Hinoa rushed inside Amaterasu. He told Vulcan and the others to hang in there. Nevertheless, someone had rushed before him. Hinoa was surprised when dust enveloped the surroundings. It turned out that Karen had beaten him to it and was blocking the gate into the building. Though wounded on his side, Karen said that the cataclysm would purify the world and end that hell. However, Hinawa stood firm and told him to get out of the way. He took out the equipment from his bag and prepared his gun. He loaded it with bullets and positioned himself to attack. Maki and Tamaki witnessed the event. Tamaki asked what it was, and Maki explained it was a new barrel model using special materials from Hajima. Previously, the Velocity Rampage shot would destroy the barrel after just one shot. But now, with the new barrel, he could use it more effectively. Hinawa was laser-focused on Karen and hit him in the stomach. It wasn't an ordinary shot because of the extremely powerful flame it released. Nevertheless, Karen just endured and accepted it. The empty shell just bounced off while Hinawa prepared to pull the trigger again. He fired consecutive shots, and instead of dodging, Karen simply took all of them with his body. He remained standing in front of the gate, just smiling. Meanwhile, Hinawa couldn't believe what was happening. Suddenly, Ritsu, the necromancer of the white clad, appeared. She asked if they now understood the situation. She said they weren't the ones keeping them there. Everyone was troubled upon that realization. Meanwhile, while still in the matchbox, Licht called Vulcan through their earpiece. However, Vulcan couldn't respond due to the shock of what happened to you. While looking at him, Lisa pleaded with you to stop. He was gradually transforming into an infernal, and Giovanni still couldn't stop laughing because of it. Vulcan was in shock, but after a moment, he awakened to reality. He answered Licht and said that you had been affected by the bug. Giovanni was controlling the bugs without any magnetic orientation. So he asked if Licht had any idea who was doing this. He asked for help from Licht because he needed insight. Licht replied that he would figure it out. That was the reason why he was there. Numerous bugs surrounded you, and he was gradually being taken over by them. He fully transformed into an infernal, something that Lisa and Vulcan couldn't accept. Vulcan didn't know what to do anymore, while Giovanni continued to laugh with delight. From the matchbox, Licht asked if Vulcan was okay. Given their circumstances, he could only think of two ways the bugs could control their companions. First was through magnetic orientation, which he had managed to disrupt. Second was a sort of dance particular to honeybees. They apparently use a figure-8 flight pattern called the waggle dance to communicate the direction and distance of things, such as food or threats. Most likely, Dr. Giovanni had embedded honeybee DNA into the bugs and was using the dance to control them. Therefore, he needed to stop the dancing specimens. Upon hearing this, Vulcan declared that he wouldn't let Giovanni get away. He promised to stop him, so he put on his mask. He said he would bring down that bastard. He observed Giovanni carefully using his mask. He thought about what Licht said about possibly breeding bugs that weren't affected by magnetic orientation. Instead, he controlled them through dance. But Vulcan thought Giovanni was too cautious. He didn't see him using bugs, especially if there was a chance of irregularity arising. Knowing that he was also an engineer, Vulcan believed these weren't bugs. He thought Giovanni had created bug mecha to control them, and if they were machines, their movement pattern and heat signature would surely be different from other bugs. Vulcan was laser-focused on his observation because he knew that somewhere in that huge swarm, he would find the machine controlling them. There were so many bugs flying around that he had difficulty figuring it out. Meanwhile, Giovanni still wouldn't stop laughing. In Vulcan's mind, he wondered where it could be. After a moment, he finally found it. He found what was controlling them, and he noticed it wasn't just one, but 7 of them. Because of that, he marked them as stars. He passed the mask to Lisa and said that their targets were now marked. So, they should finish the fight. She replied that he should leave it to her. Lisa used her ability to manifest large octopus-like tentacles. She also noticed what Vulcan was referring to as the 7-star marks and targeted them. With the help of Vulcan's mask, she identified the target and said she would destroy his tech. And she was determined that it wouldn't just be those. But she also bound Giovanni and surrounded him with tentacles, saying she would finish him off there too. It wasn't long before he burst into flames and the huge black thing covering his body disappeared. He returned to his normal form and fell to the ground. He gradually disintegrated and asked for help. However, Vulcan just stepped on his head. Lisa removed the mask, and since the fight was over, they looked for you. He was no longer there, and the gate behind them was open. They were troubled because they could hear someone laughing from inside. Vulcan was worried and confirmed if it was you. He answered that he was inside. Because of that, he rushed into the gate to find him. But Yu was still an infernal, saying that he had missed the mark. Fear was evident in Vulcan's eyes when he saw him. The center of Amaterasu was revealed, and in front of its gate was Yu as an infernal. He was holding the key and said that, with the help of the bugs, Yu's body was now his. Vulcan broke into a cold sweat when he realized Giovanni had taken over Yu's body. He added that the answer to Pi was now in his hands. The keyhole was right in front of him. Now, it was time for there to be an answer. The cataclysm would begin. The year was 198 of the solar era. Since the last cataclysm, 250 years had passed. And outside, smoke enveloped the surroundings, as Hinawa continuously released velocity rampage shots. He kept hitting Karen, who was blocking the gate to enter. Hinawa couldn't believe Karen's durability, who despite everything, was still smiling and unmoved. Captain Obi said they had no more time for this. They needed to hurry because he had a bad feeling about it. Meanwhile, Ritsu just smiled while watching them and felt pity for them. On the other hand, Arthur continued his fight against Dragon. Dragon asked what was going on, but Arthur just kept his eyes closed and concentrated while holding his Excalibur. When he opened his eyes, he targeted Dragon's chest and slashed. Nevertheless, it seemed to have no effect on him, and Dragon asked if that was supposed to be hot. He counterattacked, which Arthur dodged. Again, Arthur slashed and targeted Dragon's neck. However, these attacks had no effect on him and didn't work against him. Dragon just asked if that was all he had. Arthur's strikes just sizzled upon contact, but didn't cut or hurt Dragon at all. Dragon said that was another killing blow and asked how many he had attempted. Arthur replied that he wasn't counting. But even so, Dragon said it was useless anyway. Arthur swung his Excalibur again and hit Dragon, but he said it didn't matter how many new weapons he chose. It also didn't matter how strong he became. No man alive can ever beat him. When someone is called the strongest, there's a reason for that, and that is divine providence. So, they should finish that fight. He targeted Arthur by opening his palm and releasing an extremely powerful fire. Because of that, the impact on Arthur was strong, sending him flying far away. Until the end, he said Arthur was still nothing but a wee boy. His expectations were wasted. But Arthur still stood up, and despite looking worn out, he still didn't give up. Dragon added that even if fate itself fought against him and unleashed a storm, for him, it would be nothing more than a gentle breeze. Arthur wondered why he thought he could defeat a dragon like him. When he looked up, in front of him was his enormous opponent who wasn't affected by any of his attacks. On the other side, Tamaki looked and was surprised when she noticed Ogun lying on the ground. Meanwhile, Maki, Captain Obi, Arrow, and Hinawa continued to fight against the endless infernals and white-clad members. As for Karen, he still hadn't fallen despite the numerous shots that Hinawa had fired at him. He said that Company 8 had lost. Wasn't it obvious that this was their victory in the whole story, he said. The very foundation of that world was death. And that was the moral of the story. Therefore, the cataclysm is here. Back to Arthur. Dragon told him that he didn't care what was in the hearts of the meek, but he knew what was in his, and that was despair. Arthur trembled and sat down. Dragon added that his despair was so deep that he couldn't even stand in the face of his pressure. The scene then shifted to the center of Amaterasu. Vulcan tried to stop the now infernal Yu from inserting the key into the keyhole. However, it was too late.